All right, we are going to do our last video on the rating tool, looking at the full responsibility items. These are 5 items starting in the core practices with CP7. These were complicated items to rate by hand because there's a lot of guidelines and rating rules and data to know to look at. But now eTMACT has made this much easier. And a lot of the information here is more for your review. And there's only one input you may need to add. It's pulling in the number of clients the team reports are receiving direct services from the psychiatric care provider. Here it's 45. Total number of clients who are linked with the psychiatric care provider who's determined not to be part of the ACT team. So here it's 0. Total number of clients residing in residential settings where on-site staff manage and monitor the medications. This is coming from column D from the client survey. Of those 6, how many do we judge the team to have some pretty good communication and coordination with residential staff? We may have heard nice examples to make us think it's all of them. And so we pick 6. Then it pulls over 83% is the tentative rating. And we may further adjust if there was poor follow-up in terms of seeing people or most people within every 6 weeks. In this case, there's no adjustment and the output is as it is, 83%. Over the denominator, 90%, and eTMACT chooses the final rating. All right, let's look at the next item, CP8. Full responsibility for psychiatric rehabilitation. Again, any of the blue boxes with yellow font is data that eTMACT has migrated over from the chart review and from the client survey. Up above is just giving you information about the information used to calculate this rating. If you recall, in the PDF copy for these items for CP7 and CP8 was quite long with a lot of examples and worksheets, because you're trying to calculate using method 1 and method 2. Here, eTMACT is doing much of the work for you. There is two things you need to do when you're looking at this item CP8. You're making a judgment of other data sources. How would you rate examples observed in the daily team meeting, interviews, and other sources as it relates to the team's work in providing psychiatric rehabilitation? The team is saying they provide it to everyone. Method 1 column is looking at all 20 charts or 10 charts for this particular team. So it was 10 charts were reviewed. Of those 10 charts, 70% were found to have some psych rehab. Then of those 70%, so of the 7 charts, 29% were judged to be strong examples, 71% were systematic. Because the team endorsed all, method 1 is basically the same as method 2 at this point. I'll try to speak to that in another example. And it's basically looking at the same data. We're trying to understand if we're to make an adjustment. Per the rules, if the team said 100%, we saw 70%, that's a 30-point discrepancy, which is grounds for making an adjustment. And therefore, you see all of these rules show up about how an adjustment would be made when you're using method 1. Similarly, method 2 has its own rules if you're using method 2. Both, if I toggle weak, medium, strong, can influence what the recommended rating is for method 1 and method 2. So notice how if I go weak, it recommends a 4 and a 4, medium, 5-4, strong, 5-4. So we'll just say we're going to land on medium. Our judgment of quality here is used in addition to What percent were strong examples? What percent were systematic? And given those 3 data points, are we landing around service quality is good, service quality is mixed, service quality is poor? Those 3 data points is what's feeding into this judgment down here. This judgment down here makes a decision on whether it gets a boost or not. Think of it that way. So both of these are producing pretty close findings. And the final decision on behalf of you all, the evaluators, is to make a judgment of, is this more a 5 or a 4? Am I going with method 1 recommendation or method 2? There are tips in here on which one to use. If a team originally endorsed all or nearly all clients as receiving that service, method 2 is likely most accurate. So therefore we go with a 4. There is no green box because eTMACT can't make a recommendation. The recommendation lives here. Here's the output for method 1 and method 2. Method 1 is helpful for capturing clients who are seemingly receiving this service that the team did not credit itself for in the client survey. It will give credit for clients endorsed by the team as getting a service. Let me reframe that. It will credit for clients who were not endorsed by the team as getting the service, but then we actually saw that service delivered in the chart review. Now, we're a little bit vulnerable to our own error if we're giving excessive credit for things that maybe shouldn't have gotten credit to. Now, looking at another example, full responsibility for co-occurring disorder. The one thing to know is that it is going to be looking for whether the team's report of the number of the people who have co-occurring disorder is reaching our minimal threshold of 40%. So in this case, this is showing that they did report 53%. If it was lower than 40%, you're going to see a box come up that asks about whether you want to adjust. So if it's under 40, the guidelines would say you always default up to minimum of 40%, unless there's a clear reason why that team would be serving people who are less likely to have a co-occurring disorder. And then it goes down just like we talked about in terms of pulling that data in. Here, they endorse percent of the clients the team endorses receiving the service. Here, it was only 28% of that 53%. If we looked at all the charts, 10 charts, we saw that 30% were examples where we saw any co-occurring disorder services. So that 30% is not a discrepancy between the team's report here at 28%. That's why you don't see any of the additional rules show up here, because there's no adjustment to make. And similar for method 2. So then the final decision is really just looking at that output, which they're both on the same page, the 3s, and then you select the 3. And then full responsibility for employment services, it's very similar. So here we know what that denominator is in the calculation. That's already set. Percent of the clients the team endorsed here was 28%. Here's data pulled in for method 1 calculation, method 2 calculation. Then we're deciding here with strong, medium, and weak. Given this is mediocre, this is mediocre. So if I do low, it's going to take the poor quality, 19, and plop it right here in method 2. If I take this is basically a moderate quality finding, and I go medium, it still has it as here, 19. If I move it and say it's strong, it actually stayed the same. So there's a matrix making these decisions behind things. and thought I'd be able to demonstrate how it can move and shift with that, but that one was not a great example. Let's go to EP3. And it's similar. The assumption is at least 20% are getting and receiving wellness management recovery. This team reported 17%. If we look at our charts for method 1, it agreed with that. It's 20%. However, if we look at method 2, we only had, so just as a reminder, I didn't really speak to this earlier. Method 2 is not looking at all charts. It's saying, all right, you said that of the charts we pulled, we happen to select 3 charts that you said you're doing wellness management recovery services with. So let's look at those 3 charts. Of those 3, how many did we see as actually getting wellness management recovery? And then of those, how many did we see in terms of, so percent of endorsed client charts where we saw any? It was 2 of the 3, 67%. Then of those 2, how many did we see strong examples in systematic? So it ended up being both of those charts were rated highly in that regard. And so if you come down below, you have 2 different outputs. And this is where you have to look at the data and say, which method makes most sense? Method 1 is generating a rating of 4. Method 2 is generating a rating of 3. And this is where just reading through the rules will be helpful. What makes this one challenging, this discrepancy, and it's fake data, so it's part of why we're getting this discrepancy too, is we're on the low end of a 3 here, and this is nearing a high end of a 4. So again, trying to make sense of which method would make the most accurate rating, given what you saw. I don't think, let me see if that does that. Okay. And these are high. So I'm just going to point this out for the sake of the training. I'm probably going to replace this video when this gets fixed. This is something we've identified is not working right now. And so it's just a manual thing to look at. These 2 are high when you get 100%, 100%. And if I'm selecting either medium or strong, it definitely should be keeping it at this 13% adjustment, but it's not. So interesting, for this sake of this example, this truly is 13% over 20%, which would be a penetration of 65%, which starts closing this gap that looked really awkward and weird. This should actually be 65%. So I'm going to leave this in the video for now and seek to replace this video on full responsibility items when we get around to fixing this. But I'm just going to restate where the error is happening. It's at the point of the adjustment that there are 3 pieces of information eTMACT is looking for to see how much of an adjustment is going to be made if we qualify for one. And it's looking at what percent are strong examples. So if it's 67% or higher, you qualify, it's basically in thirds. What percent are systematic? If it's more than 67%, you get the highest credit. And then if you chose medium or strong, both of those with a high, high, medium, or high, high, strong should get you in the positive range here, which would have led to a 13 showing up at the bottom here, not 11.